Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome once again to the Mighty VH podcast with your hosts, me, Tommy London, and my good bud Tor. We have always talked about Van Halen, so we decided to share it all with you. Thank you for joining us. What's
All
going
right.
on, Tor?
You
What's the
know,
topic today?
uh, there's this idea we've been kicking around that I think subconsciously we've been kicking around forever, which is the what if episode, right? Like
Yeah,
we've always had those like, man, can you imagine if Dave never left Van Halen, or can you imagine if Dave was never in Van Halen, or Sammy, because there was that whole talk at the beginning of their career when Ted Templeman took over, like, maybe he was going to get rid of Dave and bring in Sammy Hagar of all people, right? Like that was talk. Like, can you imagine if that actually happened? So I think today we're going to go through a couple of these what ifs and see where the conversation goes, because over the years you and I have had these
yeah.
conversations and we take them to some good places. But I mean, what if, right? Like I think it's so incredibly, like, so coincidental that that whole story of when Van Halen got signed and they were working with Ted Templeman, working on pre-production for the first album, and Ted was not impressed with Dave, and had some concerns about having Dave as the singer of this band. Saw the potential for this band, but maybe if they had a different singer, and what if he would have acted on that instinct instead of, what if he zigged instead of zagged, and they were talking about bringing in Sammy Hagar, like, what would Van Halen have sounded like from the beginning? We never would have heard songs like, you would have heard the music to Running with the Devil, but you wouldn't have heard that lyric. What would Sammy
Right.
have come up with, right? Like, I mean, what would that have been like?
Would You Really Got Me had been the cover song? Would there have been a cover? It or Sammy Hagar's solo career would have also possibly been derailed. You know,
Right, because he
it
had a career prior to that. He was in Montrose and he had a
yeah,
solo career, and what would have, right? We wouldn't have known that Sammy couldn't drive 55 unless maybe Sammy would have written those lyrics over Jamie's crying, like,
yeah, right.
right?
So
And
let's do a double what if here with the same scenario. What if Sammy Hagar joined Van Halen in the beginning, and what if after it ran its course, Dave Lee Roth was the second lead singer?
oh
Could you
man,
imagine? Like
what?
that would be pretty wild, you know?
You
It,
know what, man? I have subscribed like, not wholeheartedly, but like in the back of my mind, I'd like to think, like there's been a lot of, like, in the Marvel universe, there's alternate
yeah,
universes, right?
yeah, yeah.
There's alternate universes, like, where all of that stuff happened, right? I,
The
I want
re-
to I want to believe that. So somewhere out there, that is going on right now. That is the reality in some other
That's
universe. But
insane.
but it would be crazy to think, like, you take the fury that Van Halen brought on the first album, and it comes with a different attitude. Like Dave being part of that band from the get-go, and they all evolved together in terms of musical stylings and writings, and what was
Right.
brought to the table that created the Van Halen sound, right? So the story goes, the brothers were rock fans, and they Cream and Led Zeppelin, etc., Deep Purple, and Dave was coming from a different place. He was coming from more of an urban sound, more danceable, more soul type music, and those two things together made up what we know as the early days of Van Halen. So if you take that part of the equation out, where you don't have that soul, that soda sound, you bring in Sammy, who's more of a blues based, which is also sort of has a soul background, but totally different type lyrics, type melodies, type delivery, and maybe you bring in a singer at the last second who didn't evolve with the band. Would the music still have that same fury? Would it be a little disjointed? Would it be better? Would it be something, like, that we had never even conceived of happening? Because Eddie was clearly at a different stage in his writing in 78 versus 85 when Sammy does
Right.
join. So it's
Yeah, it's
interesting.
interesting. It is.
Yeah.
It is
You know,
interesting. Could have just lasted one record. You could have
right.
just been like, yeah, this guitar guy is great, and I don't know, this isn't really working. Or like we said, it could have just went on. We'll never know. What if?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of crazy because when you stop to think, like, all of the variants of what makes up a song, like, it really you start to go down this rabbit hole of, like, where Sammy was at that point in his career, what kind of songs he was writing, because he's still evolving as an artist as well, even though he had been in the business a little longer than VH. he was still evolving too. The albums he was putting out in the mid '70s sound a lot different than the albums he was putting out in the mid '80s,
Right.
in terms of writing styles and all of that stuff. But yeah, it would have been a really interesting thing. The other what if that I always scratch my head on is, and I always thought it was a rumor, but I've heard it confirmed a few times, was, during the Diver Down era, Ed was really unhappy. And, like fair warning, the album before that was a dark album because Ed just wasn't happy with the
Right.
band situation and the friction, etc. And he turned to his old pal Gene Simmons and said, "Hey, you're looking for a guitarist? I'll be your guitarist, like
It's
put me in.
crazy.
Put me in, coach." Can you imagine?
Oh man. Do you think he would have been wearing the spaceman makeup there? Like,
I mean, listen, they had Vinnie Vincent do a totally different character, right? So they'd have Eddie do
yeah.
a different character too. But let's put Eddie in, the Vinnie Vincent makeup, right? Like whatever, because
Has anyone
okay,
done that online? Someone had to have done that, right?
must be
Or
out
the
there
Ace makeup at
somewhere,
the very least.
must be.
But
But
I think Eddie would have like. Look, I love Kiss and I love Ace Frehley. He's a fantastic guitar player and has inspired so many. But Eddie is a different type of guitar player. I'm not a guitarist. You are. You could probably vouch for all that.
oh man, for sure,
So like, if you have an Eddie Van Halen on stage with Kiss playing these songs, I mean, Kiss in its own right is just larger than life. But then you have this guy who just one person who's larger than life, like stepping
right.
out and playing a lead, like just
Well,
killing it.
at the same time, like, to Gene's credit, he said no, right? He turned him down. He turned down the
Mm.
greatest guitarist in the world to be in the band, right? He's like, yeah, we do need a guitarist, but you're not the guy,
Yeah, right.
because he knew his brand. But at the same
Yeah,
time, they did bring in Kiss brought in Vinnie Vincent, as any Kiss fan knows, and they actually had him tone it down a bit because Vinnie was a shredder. He was an up and coming shredder, and they really had him, you know, simplify his style so that it just was more in line with the brand, because Kiss was in this transitional stage and they weren't sure. They didn't want to like shock the fans with a totally different sound. So the solos on that album, the 1982 Creatures of the Night, are very simplistic, or
yeah.
more Freely esque than they would be Shredder esque. So bringing in Eddie, can you imagine asking Eddie oh dude,
Tone it
tap
down.
the brake?
Yeah, but you know what? The strength of Eddie too would have been the songwriting. I mean,
Oh,
that would have been a whole different thing. Like, look it up.
right,
Vinnie Vincent was responsible for a lot of the songs off that
right,
record,
right,
and
right,
that could have been Eddie. What
right,
if Eddie
right.
wrote "Lick It Up"?
Well, but here's the other
Would
thing too,
have
man.
been a different
Like,
record.
you don't see the Kiss guys ever really, like in photo shoots, etc., smiling. Ed's known for
Hmm,
a smile, right? Could you put Ed on
that
stage
is true.
next to Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons? Like they're all brooding, and Eddie's like, "Hey, what's up, guys?"
Yeah, they're like, "Stop smiling, Ed. Stop smiling." It would be like that. You know what it would end up being like? What's that? What's the interviewer's name? That's infamous for the Kiss interview with they
Oh,
had
the
the
Tom
makeup on.
Snyder interview.
Tom Snyder, where
Yeah,
Ace is obviously drunk or
yeah,
something
yeah,
and takes
yeah,
over the interview,
yeah.
and the other members of Kiss weren't
We're
really
not
along for
having it,
that. That
right?
would have been Eddie, but just smiling, like stop smiling. Ah,
Yeah, but then I mean, listen, man, the list goes on and on. We could do this all day, but like,
right.
I mean, the big one obviously is, what if Dave never left? What if
Yeah.
Dave? What
What
if
if Dave?
there's that whole, if you dig deep into all the Van Halen stories, there's that moment that and I can't remember what book it's in or what, but it might be Noel Monk's book, but the moment where Eddie and Dave have a final meeting and they, like it's said, it's decided, like Dave's leaving, and it was kind of a somber moment, and it
Right.
wasn't in a big fight. It was kind of like a decision. And but what if, at the door, they just turned around and were like, "Nah, man, you can't," and they hug it out, and they
What
go on
if?
to make the next album. You know, Dave's lyrics over "Summer Nights," or even, would he even approach
That's
"Love Walks In," or
right.
any of the songs, good enough that, the songs that we know as good enough would obviously have different titles.
Yeah.
But I really
Get up.
feel like at yeah, Get Up, right? Like I feel like at that time, Ed was sort of evolving as a writer, and was writing more, you know, um, songs that were a little more focused on the song as opposed to the riff only.
Mhm.
what would Dave have done with that music? What could he have done with all that stuff, you know? It's interesting because when we fast forward to 96 when there's the greatest hits and Dave does a couple songs on the greatest hits album, those songs are a little dark. It's the mid
Yeah,
90s, a little grungy out there. It's a little, the Van Halen songs are a little dark.
love
They're
those
not,
songs.
those songs are not winding up on
Ah,
Van Halen 2. They're a little too dark for that, you know?
right.
But Dave knocks it out of the park. Love those songs. They were great. They really, really worked. Would have loved to have heard more, of that time period had they, been able to keep it together. But there's another what if? What if they would have? What if they would have actually gotten together in '96? You
Oh
know,
well, that's when they should have reunited with Dave.
you
That
know,
I've mentioned that a few times. Where that was when they should have reunited and made a full length record and tour. And just judging from those two songs, I don't think they recorded more than those two songs
right?
at that moment. Maybe they did, but those two songs to me were just really good. Really good songs. And so we say, what if Dave Lee Roth never left Van Halen? How about this? What if I like to do it like that? What if Sammy Hagar turned down the offer to be in Van Halen? Now, when Hagar was offered that gig, others were mentioned or jammed with the band prior, and they include Patty Smythe. Um, Daryl Hall was contacted. I don't think that was before the Sharon thing. I think that was probably before Sammy Hagar.
Right.
And who else am I missing here? I know Ozzy had gotten a call, but I don't think that was before. That wasn't before Sammy. He got the call before the Sharon.
Interesting.
Ozzy did. Ozzy tells the story. Have you ever heard this? Ozzy
No.
says it says Eddie called me up, and the reason I know it's before Gary Sharon joined is because the Osbourne show
Oh.
came out right when he was called, he said. And Ozzy had said in an interview that, yeah, Eddie called me up and I didn't know if he was joking or serious about joining the band. And then I was like, huh? And then the Osbourne show was taken off and it just wasn't a thing.
Right. Sure.
But that would have been pretty crazy. So what if Sammy said no? And what if some of these other singers would have taken,
Right.
up on the opportunity?
Well,
I
there was
mean,
that talk too. There's mention in one of the MTV specials, I believe it was Unleashed, where they talk about they were contemplating doing a different singer on each song, putting
yeah,
together an album where each song had a different singer. They reached out to Pete Townsend too, like they reached
right.
out to a number of people that you're just like head scratchers, like, wow. And honestly, out of all the names that they drop, right, that you hear over the years of like, oh, they reached out to this one or they were thinking about that one or whatever, the only one that really makes sense was Sam. It was like Sammy
Yeah.
Hagar, like, oh, okay, I could see that. But everybody else was like, Pete Townsend. Pete Townsend's not joining Van Halen. Patty Smythe's not joining Van Halen. What are you
And you know
talking
what? You know what? We talked about how in the beginning, what if Sammy would have joined Van Halen and Dave out? Then you fast forward to 5150 there. Now, Van Halen was established at that point. They weren't established in the beginning. And Sammy was still, he was Sammy Hagar. People knew who he was in the
about?
beginning there, but even bigger. I can't try 55 and all that. Here he is at his peak. Here's Van Halen at their peak.
Right.
Both of them coming together was just like that's when it was supposed to happen,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Listen,
and
timing is everything. Timing is everything. But
yeah,
it's interesting that period, mid 80s, you saw a few bands kind of like, I mean, the Police broke up around the same
yeah,
time at the height, right?
yeah,
They'd hit their, like, man, they were huge with Synchronicity. And then that was it. They kind of broke up after that tour. Similar to
Clash
what Van
was
Halen did.
around that.
Clash was right after
Yeah,
Us Festival, but
yeah, it could
basically.
in the same time
you
frame
know
almost.
they had just run their course, but there was a lot of people out there that could have filled these shoes, or attempted to anyway. you know um it's still, the verdict I think is still out. Some people
Steve
are
Perry, another one.
interesting.
Could you imagine him? I mean, Steve Perry's, a great singer.
Oh man,
And
great writer, great
I
singer,
think
one of the
Jump is a
best.
fantastic song, but Jump is not a Steve Perry song. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, Steve Perry might be the exact opposite singer as Sammy, right? So
Yeah.
Sammy has a little bit of that whiskey growl to him. He's got the bluesy thing, and listen, Steve Perry has got this operatic, perfectly perfect, angelic voice that had hit the heights. I mean, I can only imagine what Eddie would have done with a voice like that. And he probably would have leaned more into the keyboard stuff, right? So Journey, very keyboard
Yeah,
heavy,
good point.
keyboard centric band. I think that Steve might have embraced that, you know? And who knows what's in the vault? Maybe there is a couple tracks with Steve
Oh
on it.
my God, could you imagine?
Starting rumors. Here we
What
go.
if there is a vault of all these singers? And that would be amazing. That's an album
Right?
I would love to hear. Now,
Yeah.
see, I wouldn't have wanted to hear that back then. I'd be like, no, you got to have
Right.
Dave or Sammy. This great.
Right.
But now I'd be like, wow, I'd be intrigued
Yeah.
to hear this.
Yeah.
That'd be cool, man. Would
Very
be.
cool. And so around that time, like, okay, Diver Down period, Ed jams with Brian May from Queen, and they do this little side EP, Brian May and Friends Starfleet project that Ed
Yeah,
plays guitar all over, and it's awesome. Great collector's edition. When it was out, is super hard to find, but they just released a box set in the last couple of years. But what if Ed was invited to jam on a Queen track, and play on a against Freddie Mercury, Not the craziest thing, because honestly, Ed played with Michael Jackson. It doesn't get crazier than that, right? So
no,
Ed could basically, you could put him with anybody, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, let's see what that sounds like.
right.
So, not such a crazy idea to put him on a track with just about anybody after that.
Yeah,
What would that have sounded like? So, I guess it depends on the situation. Because if you just brought in as a like, hey, just play a solo on my track, then it just sounds like the artist. But if they're collaborating and they're writing, like that's a different story. And I think, when we talk about Steve Perry and Eddie's keyboards obsession in the mid '80s, that actually could have been a thing. Like that could have been like, if it were a thing in Van Halen where you could do side projects, even though that was always frowned upon. Like,
yeah,
you could see Eddie work. Okay, Dave, you don't want to sing keyboard songs? All right, I'm going to get the guy who loves keyboard songs, and I'm just going to do a little album with him, you know?
right.
But
Hey, I'll throw a what if at you since you brought up Michael Jackson. This one just hit me in the head. What if Eddie hadn't played on Beat It? Okay. Strong song. Still could have been a number one song,
right, he
but it
certainly had
definitely
number one
helped.
songs without Eddie. He certainly has
Yeah. I
had
mean, it was
a
Michael
few of
Jackson's
those,
record was going to be,
right?
but
Right?
there was a magic to Eddie's playing on that song. What if Eddie didn't play on that Michael Jackson song? And this goes two ways. Okay. One way is, would it have propelled Thriller to be number one as an album? And that's what blocked 1984 Van Halen from hitting the number one spot.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
if Eddie hadn't done that, would maybe Van Halen would have gotten 1 week at that number one spot? I don't know.
Right.
Because think about it, what if Eddie didn't do the solo and someone didn't do the solo till maybe a week later? Could have pushed back the record. Like there's a lot of things,
A
these
lot of things.
elements, that
Sure,
what if
sure.
kind of a thing. And the other side of that is the one thing I had read, don't know if this is true, is that when Dave Lee Roth went off to make the solo record, as you mentioned here a few minutes ago, how no one in Van Halen was ever allowed to do anything else outside of Van Halen. Like it was frowned upon. So there's Dave saying, hey, wait a minute, this guy's doing this Michael Jackson record, and he goes, I'm just going to go do this. They say that is what opened the door for Dave to go, I'm going to go do this,
Mm-hmm.
do these solo songs here,
Sure.
these covers. And so what if there we go, if he didn't do the Michael Jackson thing, it may have not had Dave do the solo thing, and they could have still been together, or maybe just prolonged it a little longer until Sammy came
Sure.
into the fold. But I mean, I don't know.
I mean,
Once again,
because
what if?
when you talk about what had happened prior to Dave doing that EP, you have Ed did a guest appearance on the Nicolette Larson album that
Right.
Ted Templeman produced. He then also played on with Brian May, which while it was a minor release, it was still something that was out in the world that you could buy that had Eddie's playing on it, and you also had him on Beat It. Till then, like nobody else in the band played with anybody else, right? So everyone else is adhering to the hey, we don't play with anybody else rule, except for Ed. And then finally Dave comes around and says, oh, listen, man, you got three things out there that, the band's not a part of. I'm gonna go do this one thing. And while it was a much bigger production and obviously, it's a whole EP with songs and etc. You know, honestly, like within the the band dynamic, like I think Dave was actually well within his rights to go say, "Hey, yeah, listen, I'm gonna go do this thing. You were just on the biggest song of the year that stopped us from getting number one. I think it's cool if I go do this EP,
Right.
but clearly it dusted up, some resentment, etc., within the band. But yeah, that's a good point that you bring up.
Yeah, there's like these what ifs can snowball into so many things. How about this? What if Jump, their number one, only number one song as a band with Sammy or without, what if Jump had never been released? Wow, that's a huge game changer because that's what made them into a commercial band like that
Right.
song,
Right. It brought them out of
top
the,
radio.
the sort of dirtbag high school band, right? Like the band that all the rockers in school, all the long-haired rockers liked, to like the band your sister also liked, right? Like it just brought them. They were then on pop radio. They were strictly a rock band, and now you would hear them on like Z100 and other pop stations because that song was, the number one and was played on pop stations, and suddenly, giving them this audience that they had never had before, which really snowballs into a lot of things that people don't realize. So suddenly now your posters are being sold at Sam Goody, right? And they're selling in higher numbers, right? Your singles are now selling in higher numbers. When you have a hit, like they make a big deal about it in the industry because it is a big deal because it affords you much more revenue streams than just the actual song or just the actual album itself. Like there's more, you're selling more merchandise, you're selling more tickets to your concerts. Like a hit means a lot in the industry. So it's an interesting idea. What if of whether Jump was ever produced or not? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, take it away from that album, you still have a strong album.
Oh yeah,
But
great,
was
great album.
Jump the intro for everyone to know that record? You know what I mean? Van
And know
Halen
the band, yeah.
enthusiasts would have known it, but just everyone else getting turned
So
on to it.
interesting that you bring that up. So how about this? So you talk about the step up with Jump in terms of the stature of the band in the industry and in pop culture. If they didn't have that and they just remained this arena rock band, on that level, and they didn't hit the pop charts, similar to a lot of other bands, how many people would care if the singer left? I mean, it was big news when Dave left and Sammy joined.
Right.
Like it was on People Magazine. Would it be in People Magazine if they had never had that number one hit? Right? Would they be as forward facing? Now, listen, Ed had, he was married to Valerie. They were in People Magazine already, so like they already had that foot in the door there. But would it be such a big? But I think that they were in that magazine because of Valerie. Ed's not making People Magazine on his own. He's married to a television star, one of the
Well,
biggest
yeah,
television stars.
yeah.
So while they were already in that type of, supermarket tabloid, I wonder if anybody would really care. Like listen, like Deep Purple changed singers. Rainbow changed singers. How many? That wasn't headline news. You know what I mean? Like in the rock community, yes. In Circus Magazine, yes, big deal. Not beyond
Mhm.
that though,
No,
right?
right,
So would Van Halen still be in that sort of
right.
league?
Well, MTV would have been a huge factor. I guess it would have depended on what video. Hey, what
Yes.
if Jump wasn't on that record and Tattoo was? Would they have gotten the status from the first single that they wanted? Because honestly, I felt when Different Kind of Truth came out. First of all, She's the Woman should have been the first single released off of that record. Okay, now I know we're gonna probably save
I
this
think
for
any
another
other
episode,
song from that
so
album could have been the first single. Any
maybe I
song.
shouldn't dive into this now because this is gonna be a whole
Don't
other
get me
rabbit hole.
started.
Well, I'll just put my foot in the pool here, just dip. Yeah, She's the Woman I felt should have been the first single, or like you said, anything else. Tattoo, in my opinion, was thrown on there real quick to try to hit pop radio,
Hmm,
and try to recreate that magic of Jump. Not that it sounds like Jump, but in terms of, hey, we need to get on these channels on this radio. I thought that was the wrong move. Classic rock radio would have embraced She's the Woman, and,
sure.
and it just would have been all over the place. Anyway, but what if Tattoo was on 1984, and that was the first single, and let's just say it did as well as Tattoo did when it was released, which wasn't too well actually on
Hmm.
pop radio. Could
Hmm.
that have really derailed Van Halen with the rest of that record, like Panama and Hot for Teacher? Or just maybe there wouldn't have been a budget for another video. Like who
Interesting.
knows?
Interesting.
You know?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you think about rolling out an album and rolling out the singles and what that strategy is there from the label side of things,
Yeah.
Yeah, you need that first, especially the way that they launched it, right? It was New Year's Eve, 1983, and it was going to be premiered in midnight in 1984, and it needed to hit. It needed to like they knew they had a hit on their hands. They knew they had a big splashy song on their hands. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put a weak song in such a big spotlight for that
Right.
night, right? So they knew what they had. But that's an interesting point, to start to do a single that might not have been strong, and let's see where the album goes, and then the next single kind of takes off, Panama kind of takes off. But yeah, with the trajectory on that, dude, you're
Maybe
making
the
my
first
you're making
single
my
would have
head
been,
spin. You're making my
maybe,
head spin.
maybe the first single would have been Panama or I'll Wait for that matter.
Right,
If they were going for a keyboard song for at that time,
right,
that was
right,
the
right,
first
right.
single.
Dude, we could go on for all day. I'll do this with you all
I
day.
love this. We got to do more. Hey, listen, I want to side note anyone listening, if you have a what if, please reach out to us via the comments, a DM, or an email at the Mighty Van Halen podcast at gmail.com.
For
Because I
sure.
definitely want to do this more often. Do you have any more what
Yeah.
ifs that
Oh
you want
man.
to hit?
I mean, dude, there's so many. Yeah, but you know what? You're right. Let's save them for another show. We'll talk
Yeah,
about this some other time.
because
But
we could go
please,
off on this.
like, listen, if you guys are listening to this episode and sparking any ideas, make sure you leave us a comment and let's keep the conversation going. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at mighty_VH_podcast. And thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate all the support we've been getting over these last bunch of episodes. This has been such a good time for me and Tommy to be
Yeah.
broadcasting just our regular conversations that we'd be
Yep.
having on a random Tuesday anyway.
Hey, one thing I would like to say to whoever is listening, what if you didn't tune in? Wouldn't you be regretting it now? What if?
They
Ah,
would definitely, I can tell you, they'd be definitely regretting it.
they'd be regretting it, man. They'd be regretting it. Make sure you share it with your friends. Let's build up this podcast. We're all family here. We're all lovers of the Mighty Van Halen.
Right
So
on.
thanks for being part of it.
And until next time, happy
Happy
trails.
trails. What if they didn't cover that? No, I'll save that for next time.